And we're live. Welcome back to the J-Star broadcast. I made ramen. Alright, today we're watching an actual Justice Warrior video.
Families with young children comprise about 14% of this city's population. They comprise about 30% of the set of New Yorkers who are leaving the city. And that's because after housing, childcare is the number one cost in so many New Yorkers' lives. And we see that in the average estimate of $22,500 a year being the cost of childcare for a single child across these 5 boroughs.
So that was Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani in Brooklyn talking about his plans to give free childcare to all the families in New York City. And part of his justification for this program is that families are fleeing New York City at exorbitant rates. Now, on this channel, we've actually covered this phenomenon before it recently became trending on Twitter.com, actually back in July when Mamdani won the Democratic primary. And in that video, I brought up this Bloomberg article, which indicates that since 2020, 18% of the population with...
He's gonna try to say that families are actually fleeing because of crime. Watch.
With children under age 5 has exited the city. Families are leaving at extraordinary rates. And by the way, it's also true, although to a less severe degree, that families with children under the age of 18 are also fleeing the city. But recently, we actually received information, again, from this chart that has been going viral on Twitter.com that indicates that there is a massive left-wing city exodus, and all of the families are moving, apparently, to Florida, Texas, and basically red states with way less social welfare programs and way less housing restrictions. And this is what I want to talk about today. The real demographic change that people are not addressing in major left-wing cities, why red states are capitalizing on that, and of course, how all of these programs that are proposed that supposedly are meant to help these families, in reality are just luxury beliefs that appeal to double-income, no-kids households, the base of the Mamdani-type candidates, and of course, they're going to backfire, but that's not necessarily a bad thing for the Mamdani types. But before we get into that, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Oh, give me the money.
No.
Thing and how he's going to pay for it by raising taxes at the New York State level, which he can't do as mayor of New York City, and that is what is supposed to solve the affordability crisis that is causing families to leave the city of New York in droves.
It's one of Zohran Mamdani's signature issues and one of the most ambitious: free childcare for every family in New York. The cost is estimated at $6 billion a year and would cover infants as young as 6 weeks to children up to pre-K. But the plan depends on tax increases on corporations and the city's wealthiest residents, and a vast infrastructure of personnel and sites that have yet to be identified.
However, interestingly enough, if you actually look at the exit polling data from the New York City mayoral election, what you'll come to realize is that had these families not left the city of New York, and they represented a significant more portion of the electorate as they did just 5 years ago, Zohran Mamdani would not be the mayor-elect. Again, let's look at this NBC exit poll on the voting patterns of people with and without children. So as you can see right here in this NBC News exit polling data, that if you answer the question, if you have any children under the age 18 in the affirmative, then only 45% of you voted for Zohran Mamdani compared to 48% for Andrew Cuomo, and the remainder for Curtis Sliwa and I believe another candidate, or all other candidates. Now, if you said no, you don't have children under 18, 53% of you voted for Zohran Mamdani compared to 40% for Cuomo, and again,
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know why you're talking about this, man. The election is over. It's over. Let's just recap here. Okay, Zohran is saying, I want to make things more affordable for families, for parents, with children. Okay. And in response, Actual Justice Warrior is saying, well, parents didn't vote for you? Like, okay, yeah, sure. The fuck does it matter? Like, just because they didn't vote for him doesn't mean he doesn't want to, help them. He's gonna give you free healthcare whether you like it or not, man. That's right. That's right. You're gonna get free healthcare, Actual Justice Warrior. Okay, you can kick and scream all the way. Okay, we're
remainder a mixture between Sliwa and other candidates. Now, it's important for you to understand that obviously there were 3 candidates that were largely promoted in the race, so I'm adding the non-Mamdani votes from Andrew Cuomo and from Curtis Sliwa as votes against Mamdani because that's exactly what they were. And what you find out when you do that math is that Mamdani does not get a majority of any group except for women with no children, and his majority is quite decisive at 55%. Again, while he barely beat Andrew Cuomo in the category of men with children, he still lost when you add up all other candidates. He lost against women with children to Andrew Cuomo, who got an absolute majority. He gains a plurality of men with no children children, but again, if you add up all other candidates, he did in fact lose that. And again, it's only women with no children at 55% that he gets an absolute and decisive majority. So isn't it curious?
Why is he helping them when they didn't vote for him?
Is the major thing that is driving families out of the city of New York. And his solutions, which by the way, obviously were the most vocal and most broadcasted solutions, are rent stabilization in order to make sure families, wink wink, can stay in the city of New York, and free childcare. But families with children rejected Mamdani, and he only won a victory, an absolute.
Okay, yeah, again, it doesn't matter if they rejected him. Okay, yeah, they did. Okay, well, he won anyway, so fucking what? And anyway, rent stabilization would help families as well. Why would that not help them? Don't you think that would, help everyone? If it works, if you're not a pessimist about it? Which obviously you are, okay? But, like, what I'm saying is, like, even in your worldview, it's not like, rent stabilization is particularly a bad thing for families. According to your worldview, it's bad for everyone. So, like, the fuck...
Absolute majority, and decisively so, in the category of women with no children. Well, the reason for that is because rent control and rent stabilization and free childcare are luxury beliefs that don't actually benefit families, and that's why they leave cities that have these policies in droves to go to places where rent control and rent stabilization are outright banned, which, by the way, you can see by this chart right here. You can basically look at it, and what you find out is that people are moving away from restrictive left-wing areas that make it more difficult to build, but offer a bunch of subsidies, supposedly to help families, for places like Austin, Texas, like in Florida, where rent control and rent stabilization is outright banned, and where they do not offer free government paid for childcare. Now, these smug elitist progressives will look at this data, look at the way that people are moving, and say, well, those people are voting against their own interests, they're moving away against their own interests, when in reality, nothing could be further from the truth. Again, we talked about multiple times how Mamdani actually offers nothing new in terms of housing policy in the city of New York. We've had rent control since the post-World War II era in the city. The rent stabilization program dates back to the 70s. 44% of apartments are already in rent stabilization. The idea that you're just going to ratchet that number up and it's somehow going to magically produce the dividends that he's asking for is absolutely...
Okay, so...
Come on, gangster.
This doesn't make any sense.
I mean, he kept a gangster. A gangster who looked and talked just like you would expect.
What he's saying is that Mamdani policy is going to drive families out of New York. They're going to leave. Okay? That's the narrative. And, what he's saying here is, families are leaving New York, they're going to Austin, they're going to Florida, and it's because of socialism. Okay? Wrong. Okay, people are leaving New York because New York is too fucking expensive. It's too expensive to live there. So people are leaving. That's what happens. That's what Mamdani is trying to solve. Okay, if he can make New York more affordable for regular people, for working people, then they won't leave. Okay, that's it. The cost of living is marginally cheaper. Not even just marginally, like, at times significantly cheaper in these red states. And we can talk about why that is, but it's kind of a long thing. It's not because of their policy. Okay, that's all I'll say about that.
Absolutely ridiculous and false, especially when you look at other cities where families are fleeing, which are Los Angeles, who has about 60% of their apartments under rent stabilization, and San Francisco, who has almost 2/3 of their apartments in that particular program. Obviously, these are not family-oriented policies, and by the way, one of the things that has also led to increases in people leaving the city of New York due to the fact that more units have been pulled off the market is the 2019 rent control law that Governor Andrew Cuomo signed back in the day because of progressive Democrats who had their progressive wave back in that year, putting it on his desk. This caused a drop of tens of thousands of available units in the city of New York, because prior to that law, you could actually, as a landlord, get an adjustment on your rent stabilized rate if you improved your apartment. However, that law said that was no longer the case, and it didn't even exempt apartments that were currently going through renovations to get those adjustments. So you have a bunch of buildings in the city of New York where they have made it more advantageous to keep these apartments empty because you would lose more money under the rent stabilized and rent control rate renting it, because again, it doesn't cover the cost. And we highlighted a specific building a bunch of times on this channel that was featured in a viral video, and I explained how in the beginning of that particular video, the guy who was calling out this program said that you could get $6,000 for a 4-bedroom apartment in that neighborhood, but that that building in particular was actually in the news because a guy was refusing to leave when the landlord wanted to renovate the place, and the reason he was refusing to leave is because his rent was capped at $350 a month. You can't make any money on $350 a month, and when you pass a law saying that you can't get an adjustment even if you update the entire apartment, you end up in a situation where it's vacant, and again, tens of thousands of units have been pulled off the market due to Mamdani style policy. And again, if you look at this chart that is going viral right here, what you essentially see present on this chart are not cities that aren't fast growing in other regards. What you actually see are cities in red states that have good zoning rules, pro-builder kind of policies, growing in children under 5, and again, these cities often outright ban the very programs that the left-wing progressives are trying to push in order to solve the affordability crisis. But these places are more affordable because they focus on the supply side of things. Now, of course, there are some outliers in here. Washington, D.C. has seen some gains. Obviously, D.C. has a bunch of restrictions. It's a left-wing area, but the thing is, the government sector grows massively, and that leads to people moving there. That leads to families moving there, super wealthy families. It's one of the wealthiest areas in the entire country, wealthier than many areas in Manhattan, and those people can still afford to have families. And you also have Seattle, which is a left-wing area that was growing in population, but the mayor that they just ousted was actually recently moving in the correct direction. However, he has been replaced with a socialist who's having their childcare subsidized by her wealthy Manhattan parents, and she wants to institute all the same Mamdani policies that drive people away. But in addition to affordability, one of the things that you will also notice about a bunch of these cities that are increasing in population is that they didn't really embrace the defund the police movement. Again, there are notable outliers that are included that can be explained away for different reasons, but the overall trend right here, as you can see, is affordability through supply increases. So good building policies, not rent control, not rent stabilization. In fact, many of these cities, it is outright banned on the state level, as well as increased zoning restrictions being banned at the state level. But on the flip side, what you see is all of the bad zoning, all of the left-wing regulations, all of the policies that are supposedly there in order to make families want to stay, backfiring completely. And by the way, this should be surprising to no one. How many times have you heard a national figure talk about the importance of something like paid family leave if you want to raise the birth rates in the United States of America? I'm sure you hear it all the time. It's in left-wing media, and it's starting to creep into right-wing populist media. But the thing is that never gets asked in response to this is, how can they make the case that paid family leave is the thing that will cause a birthing boom in the United States of America and fix our population problems when almost all of the countries that have that policy have lower birth rates than the United States of America? Look, we have to face reality. The only people that are having more children in order to collect more welfare are the dregs of our society. People in the hood with multiple baby daddies that, of course, are doing it in order to game the system, who don't actually want to work. For regular,
of course,
what
yeah.
they want in order to have...
Yeah, they're just gaining the system. Yeah, man. You know, listen, America, you know who the real enemy is? It's the single mother on food stamps. That's the real enemy. You know, she needs to be in jail. She's gaining the system.
Have a family is community, not government support. In fact, government support often separates you from the community, separates you from institutions like the church, and that prevents you from actually wanting to form a family because it changes the mindset of the people, much in the same way that it also teaches them to be helpless. We talked about this phenomenon before. It's called learned helplessness. In addition to that, when we talk about rent stabilization as a family-oriented policy, that flies in the face of all logic and reason, and it should be obvious that it does, because the fact is, when you get a rent-stabilized unit in New York City and it's at a good price, you don't move out. Like, that is a thing that you almost never do, and the reason you don't move out from that is because the market rent, because of so many apartments being in rent stabilization, and of course the negative effects on supply in a place like the city of New York, is so much higher. So you would lose a significant amount of money. But the thing is, if you're locked into an apartment because you wouldn't afford to leave the city otherwise, and that apartment is not large enough for you to feel comfortable starting a family, you don't start a family because it's not in your self-interest to do so, because the cost of jumping from rent stabilized 1 or 2 bedroom apartment to a much larger place that you would have to pay market rate for is just not something people aren't willing to do. So in reality, Mamdani's policies of more rent stabilization are actually going to do the exact opposite. And in addition to that, you already have so many people who have been locked into those really good price apartments for decades in the city of New York, so they don't leave due to normal market conditions, you know, when prices go up or when they get older, because again, they're incentivized to stay. So there's no real place for families that are just starting out to move into, because that also has damaging effects on supply, which of course ends up increasing the prices. Now you compare and contrast that to Austin, Nashville, any of these positive growth areas that are seeing nearly 100% increases in families with children under 5, and what actually happens? Because they actually allow building, prices fall. It's a competitive market that caters to the consumer, and so if you want to start a family, you don't have this giant burden against you of actually having to give up your rent stabilized place and go into the market rate, because you're never going to find a larger, cheaper rent stabilized apartment because somebody else is already holding that down till the end of time. And again, there's a lot of large apartments in the city of New York that are being held down by single individuals because again, the rent is just so much cheaper. But
except that people move all the time. They do. Like, people don't really move apartments just because they found one that is slightly cheaper. Okay? Because you have to understand that moving is a process that takes a lot of time. It's annoying. People don't want to do it. Okay, so the money that you save from moving has to justify the actual process of moving. And anyway, the real reason that people move is because of life. Okay, it's because they found a new job. It's because they had a kid and they want to raise them in the burbs or whatever. Okay, like that's the actual reason. Yeah, like people aren't fucking moving across the country because they found a slightly cheaper apartment.
People would downsize as they get older,
fuck are
move
you-
on with their lives, but
what are
that
you
doesn't happen
talking
because it's not
about,
incentivized to happen. And this is the crazy thing about this, is that you have a bunch of liberal, single women with no kids that are voting for policies, in theory, in order to help families, that families are rejecting because they know the exact opposite is helping them. They also want more emphasis on public safety. That becomes a higher concern when you are a parent, when you have children, but Mamdani's in the defund the police camp, and so are these single left-wing women. So if you want an explanation on why left-wing cities are dying, why families are leaving, it's because of the very policies of those unchecked left-wing cities. And I know people are going to point out that Austin is actually one of the most liberal parts of Texas. That's absolutely true. But the thing is, Texas bans rent control outright. Texas also, in addition to that, does not allow any of the local areas to do zoning above the Texas maximum caps. So when Austin had to look for solutions,
Yeah, man, you know why people are moving from New York to Texas? It's because they they find out that yes, Texas doesn't have rent control. Babe, we got to move there. Like what is this fantasy that this person is
to
like
housing
living
prices
in?
going
What?
up in the early 2020s, what did they do? They went in the only direction they could go, which of course was to allow more building. And the crazy thing about this is that if you told this to these single progressive women, these childless single progressive women, or the double income no kid households, which by the way, I'm not knocking, I happen to be in one of those households now, I do plan to have a family in the future, most of those people would look at you like you're the monster, and then they lecture you on the virtues of their voting patterns. However, when you look at the voting patterns of the people that are affected, what you find out is that they're telling you they want the opposite. Their revealed preference is exactly contrary to what these people who are not in this situation are actually voting for, which unironically shows that they're worse at empathy than people who actually understand the realities of the situation. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think about this phenomenon down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the death of the family in the left-wing city. Till next